I'm Chloe Davis, 28, female. I live in a quiet suburban town with my husband, David, and our golden retriever, Buddy. For the past 6 years, I've poured my heart into teaching third graders, finding joy in the small moments of discovery and growth. My life was blissfully ordinary, built on a foundation of love, routine, and what I thought was unshakable family trust. But a single act of betrayal, disguised as an act of care, would soon shatter that foundation into a million pieces. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. My world narrowed to the 4 walls of my bedroom the moment I came home from the hospital. The appendectomy had been routine, but the recovery was proving to be a slow, painful slog. David was a rock, fluffing my pillows and making sure my pain medication was on schedule. But with his demanding job as a financial analyst, he couldn't be home all the time. That's where my family stepped in, or so I thought. My mom, Linda, a retired nurse, and my younger sister, Jessica, moved into our guest room, promising to take care of me. "We'll handle everything, sweetie," Mom said, her voice dripping with practiced sympathy as she adjusted the blanket over my legs. "You just focus on getting better." Jessica, ever the social media manager, documented the entire process with her phone, posting filtered photos of my brave recovery journey. She'd flutter into the room, all bright smiles and cheerful updates about her online followers, before disappearing for hours, phone glued to her ear. I was grateful for their presence, even if Jessica's version of care mostly involved asking if the Wi-Fi was strong enough for her live streams. In those first few hazy days, I was too medicated and exhausted to notice much. I trusted them completely. They were my family. Mom handled my medications, and Jessica would bring me meals, which were usually takeout she'd ordered for herself. David would come home to a clean house and a seemingly well-cared-for wife, and he'd thank them profusely. The centerpiece of my life, sitting on my bedside table, was my wedding ring. It wasn't just a piece of jewelry, it was a legacy, a stunning, custom-designed piece with a 2-carat diamond. It had been a gift from my grandmother, passed down to my mother, and then given to David to propose with. It was worth around $25,000, but its sentimental value was immeasurable. It was a symbol of generations of love and commitment. Before the surgery, I had taken it off and placed it in its velvet box on my nightstand, and figuring it was safer there than at the hospital. I'd glance at it every day, a comforting, sparkling reminder of the life David and I had built. One evening, about a week into my recovery, I felt a little stronger. I decided to try putting it back on. My fingers still felt a bit swollen, but I missed the familiar weight of it. I reached for the velvet box, my heart fluttering with a small sense of normalcy returning. But when my fingers closed around it, the box felt strangely light. I clicked it open. It was empty. A cold wave of panic washed over me, so intense it made me dizzy. I fumbled around the nightstand, my hands shaking, knocking over a glass of water. "David," I called out, my voice raspy. He rushed in, his face etched with concern. "What is it, honey? What's wrong?" "The ring," I whispered, holding up the empty box. "It's gone." David's face went pale. He immediately dropped to his knees, searching under the bed, behind the nightstand, and through the bed sheets. "It has to be here, Chloe. It must have just fallen out." But the search was frantic and fruitless. The ring was simply not there. My mom and Jessica rushed in, drawn by the commotion. "What's all the fuss about?" Jessica asked, filming the scene with her phone, a slight annoyance in her voice. "My ring is gone," I cried, tears welling in my eyes. Mom put on a show of shock, her hand flying to her chest. "Oh, dear Lord, are you sure? Where did you last see it?" "It was right here in its box on the nightstand." And I insisted, my voice trembling. "I haven't touched it since before the surgery." The atmosphere in the room shifted. What started as concern quickly morphed into something else. A subtle, unnerving performance. Mom began to fuss, suggesting I had misplaced it in a painkiller. Induced haze. "You've been so out of it, sweetie. You probably put it somewhere for safekeeping and forgot." Jessica lowered her phone, a strange, calculated look on her face. "Maybe one of the nurses who came by to check on you took it," she suggested, planting a seed of doubt aimed at a faceless stranger. But no nurses had come by. My mom, the retired nurse, had been handling all my post-op care. David, ever the pragmatist, wanted to file a police report immediately. "It's insured, Chloe, but the sentimental value. We need to report it stolen." That's when my mom's opposition became strangely firm. "Oh, let's not be hasty, David," she said, wringing her hands. "Involving the police will just create a mess. Think of the questions, the reports. Chloe is still recovering. The stress will be too much for her." Jessica chimed in, nodding vigorously. "Mom's right. Besides, what if it just turns up? You'll look silly for calling the police over something you just misplaced." Their resistance felt off. It wasn't logical. Why would they be so against reporting the theft of a valuable family heirloom? I was weak, confused, and overwhelmed. My head was spinning from both the missing ring and the strange behavior of my own family. David, wanting to shield me from further distress, reluctantly agreed to wait a day or two to search the house thoroughly one more time. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every shadow in the room looked menacing. The empty box on my nightstand felt like a gaping wound. I replayed every conversation, every interaction since the surgery. My family's reassurances now felt hollow, their concern feigned. The trust I had placed in them, so absolute and unconditional, was beginning to fray at the edges. I had a sickening feeling in the pit of my stomach that this was no random theft, no simple misplacement. The betrayal wasn't from a stranger, it was coming from inside my own house. The people who were supposed to be caring for me, my own mother and sister, were acting guilty. In the empty box was the silent, screaming proof. The next few days were a masterclass in gaslighting. Mom and Jessica would help me search for the ring, going through my jewelry box with a performative sadness, sighing about how devastating it all was. They would look in the most illogical places, the kitchen pantry, the linen closet, all while reminding me how forgetful I can be. "Remember that time you lost your car keys and we found them in the refrigerator?" Mom would say with a sad little smile. It was a story from 10 years ago, but she wielded it like a weapon to undermine my confidence and my memory. My suspicion grew with every passing hour. I started paying closer attention to their interactions. They spoke in hushed tones whenever they thought I was asleep. I'd hear snippets of conversations from the hallway, words like pawn shop, final sale, and no refunds. My blood ran cold. One afternoon, I pretended to be napping and overheard Jessica on the phone in the guest room. Her voice was low but agitated. "I told you it was a stupid idea." She whispered furiously. "She's getting suspicious." "No, I can't ask for it back. The money's already spent. The tickets are non-refundable." Tickets. The money's already spent. My mind raced. Jessica had been talking for weeks about her dream trip to Bali. She was an aspiring travel influencer who desperately wanted to curate a feed of exotic beaches and luxury villas to boost her follower count. But she was constantly broke, living paycheck to paycheck from a part-time social media job. She could never afford a trip like that on her own. The pieces of the puzzle started clicking into place, forming a picture so ugly I could barely look at it. My ring, her dream vacation, the whispers, the lies. That evening, I decided to test my theory. While David was in the shower, I limped into the living room where Mom and Jessica were watching TV. I sat down heavily on the couch and let out a theatrical sigh. "You know," I said, my voice laced with fake despair. "David and I were talking. We think it's best to file the police report tomorrow. The insurance company needs it to process the claim. They said they'll have to send detectives to interview everyone who's been in the house." The reaction was immediate and telling. Jessica's face lost all color. Mom's hand, which was lifting a teacup to her lips, began to tremble so violently that the cup rattled against the saucer. "Detectives," Mom stammered, placing the cup down with a clatter. "Is that really necessary, Chloe? It's a family matter." "It's a felony, Mom," I said, keeping my gaze level. "The insurance company treats it very seriously. They'll probably want to look at everyone's phone records and bank statements to rule out any possibilities." Jessica shot up from her seat. "That's an invasion of privacy. They can't do that. They can, and they will if they suspect fraud." I lied, my voice firm. I had no idea if that was true, but it didn't matter. The panic in their eyes told me everything I needed to know. They were guilty. My own mother and sister had stolen my grandmother's ring, sold it, and were now trying to convince me I was crazy. The betrayal was so profound, it felt like a physical blow, more painful than any surgical incision. They hadn't just stolen a piece of jewelry. They had stolen my trust, my sense of security, and my faith in the people I loved most. With my suspicions confirmed, the fog of grief began to clear, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. I knew I couldn't confront them without concrete proof. Their web of lies was too thick, and they would only deny everything and paint me as the hysterical, ungrateful daughter. I needed evidence, something undeniable that would expose them completely. My first step was to get them out of the house. The next morning, I told them that a friend from work had offered to come stay with me for the next few days. She's a nurse practitioner, I said, and she feels terrible about what happened. She wants to help out so you two can get a break. My mom and Jessica exchanged a look, a mixture of relief and suspicion, but they couldn't argue with the logic. Within an hour, they had packed their bags and left, promising to call and check on me constantly. The moment their car pulled out of the driveway, my investigation began. I started with Jessica's room. It was messy, littered with cheap clothes and makeup palettes, but I wasn't looking for the ring. I was looking for a receipt. I knew my sister. She was sentimental about the strangest things. She kept ticket stubs from movies, receipts from fancy dinners, anything that served as a trophy of an experience. I searched her drawers, her purse, the pockets of her jackets. Tucked inside a book titled Manifest Your Millions, I found it, a small, crisp receipt from a high-end pawn shop in the next town over. It was dated just 2 days after my surgery. There was no detailed description of the item. Just a transaction number and a staggering amount, $8000. It was far less than the ring was worth, a pathetic sum for a priceless heirloom, but it was enough for a luxury vacation. My hands trembled as I took a picture of the receipt with my phone. This was my smoking gun. Next, I needed to know more about the trip. A quick search of Jessica's social media gave me everything. She had been liking and commenting on posts from a specific luxury resort in Bali for weeks. On her laptop, which she'd carelessly left logged in, I found the email confirmations, non-refundable first-class flights for 2 and a reservation for a 2-week stay in a private villa with an infinity pool. The total cost was just over $7,500. The dates of the trip were set for 3 weeks from now, and who was the second ticket for my mother, Linda. The pieces fit together perfectly. This wasn't just Jessica's selfish impulse. This was a conspiracy. My mother, the woman who had held my hand through fevers and heartbreaks, had not only allowed her younger daughter to steal from her recovering, vulnerable older daughter, but she had planned to enjoy the spoils of the crime with her. The depth of their deception was staggering. They had watched me cry, they had pretended to comfort me, all while knowing my ring was funding their tropical getaway. The pain of it was sharp and suffocating, but beneath the pain, something else was stirring, anger. A cold, clear, calculating anger. They thought I was weak, broken, and easily manipulated. They were about to find out how wrong they were. I now had the receipt, the travel itinerary, and a burning desire for justice. My plan for revenge began to take shape. It wouldn't be loud or hysterical. It would be quiet, methodical, and devastating. With the evidence in hand, my plan crystallized. I wasn't just going to expose them. I was going to make them walk into their own humiliation, ensuring they could never twist the narrative or play the victims. David was horrified when I showed him the proof, his anger a mirror of my own. He wanted to call the police immediately, to have them arrested, but I stopped him. No. I said, my voice steady. A court case would be messy, and they'd try to paint me as unstable. I want something more personal. I want them to be judged by the one person whose opinion my mother values more than anything, her own sister, my Aunt Carol. Aunt Carol was the matriarch of our extended family, a no-nonsense, fiercely moral woman who had always been the family's judge and jury. My mother had spent her entire life desperately seeking Carol's approval. An expose in front of her would be a fate worse than prison for my mother. The trap was simple but elegant. I called my mom and told her that David and I were planning a small recovery celebration dinner in 2 weeks' time. I explained that I wanted to thank her and Jessica properly for all their help. I also mentioned that Aunt Carol and my cousin Sarah would be there. I know how much you love seeing them, I said, my voice sweet as honey. I could almost hear the preening pride in my mother's voice as she accepted. A chance to be lauded for her devotion. In front of her sister, it was irresistible. For the next 2 weeks, I played the part of the healing, slightly naive daughter. I'd talked to my mom and Jessica on the phone, listening to their fake sympathy about my still missing ring. Jessica even had the audacity to talk about her upcoming work trip to Bali, a fantastic opportunity that had just fallen into her lap. I would make all the right noises of encouragement, all while the trap was being set. David and I worked as a team. He contacted the pawn shop. Posing as a lawyer, he informed the owner that they were in possession of a stolen family heirloom with a police report about to be filed. He mentioned the unique design and the jeweler's marks, making it clear this wasn't just any diamond ring. The owner, not wanting to be implicated in a felony, quickly agreed to cooperate. He confirmed that a young woman matching Jessica's description had sold the ring and that he still had it in his safe. David arranged to buy it back for the $80,000 they had paid out, a small price to reclaim a piece of our family's history and a crucial prop for my final act. The day before the dinner, I booked a one-way bus ticket to a city 5 hours away, scheduled to depart at the exact time the dinner was supposed to start. I packed a small bag. I wasn't running away. I was creating an alibi for my absence and a dramatic stage for my exit. The final piece of the plan was a letter. I spent hours writing it, pouring all my pain, anger, and disappointment onto the pages. I made copies for everyone who would be at the dinner. The stage was set. The actors were all heading toward their places, completely unaware of the roles they were about to play in my final performance. The velvet ring box, now with its precious contents safely back inside, sat on my dresser, waiting for its grand reveal. The evening of the dinner party, our house was filled with the scent of roasted chicken and the low hum of conversation. Aunt Carol, my cousin Sarah, my mother, and Jessica were all gathered in the living room, sipping wine. I was a bundle of nerves, but my resolve was like steel. I played the gracious host, accepting their compliments on how well I looked, all while my heart hammered against my ribs. David, my silent partner in this drama, kept the conversation flowing. Mom was in her element, recounting stories of her tireless care for me during my recovery, basking in the admiring glances from Aunt Carol. Jessica was on her phone, of course, probably posting a selfie with a caption like #family first. The hypocrisy was so thick I could choke on it. After we finished eating, I asked everyone to gather in the living room. I have something to share. I announced, my voice clear and steady. I could see the flicker of confusion on my mother's and sister's faces. I started by thanking them all for coming. Then I turned my attention to Mom and Jessica. I especially want to thank my mother and my sister for their incredible support over the past few weeks. In fact, their dedication was so inspiring that I felt it deserved a special kind of recognition. I walked over to the mantelpiece and picked up a small, beautifully wrapped gift. It was the velvet ring box. I handed it to my mother. "This is for you, Mom, a token of my appreciation." She looked flustered but pleased. "Oh, Chloe, you shouldn't have." She began to unwrap it, her fingers fumbling with the ribbon. Jessica leaned in, her eyes wide with curiosity. As my mother lifted the lid of the box, her smile froze. She stared down at the glittering diamond ring inside, her face turning ashen. Jessica gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. The room fell silent. Aunt Carol and Sarah looked on, confused. "Recognize it?" I asked, my voice dangerously soft. "I believe you two are quite familiar with it, although you probably saw it last on the counter of a pawn shop." My mother started to stammer. I don't know what you're talking about." "Oh, I think you do," I said, my voice rising with controlled fury. I pulled out my phone and passed it to Aunt Carol. "Swipe through," I instructed. The first picture was of the pawn shop receipt. The next, the email confirmations for the flights and luxury villa in Bali, with both of their names clearly visible. The final one was a screenshot of their bank statement, showing a large deposit that matched the receipt exactly. David had managed to get that through a friend who worked in banking fraud investigation. As Aunt Carol scrolled through the evidence, her expression shifted from confusion to disbelief and then to pure, unadulterated rage. She slowly raised her eyes and fixed them on my mother. "Linda," she said, her voice low and menacing, "what have you done?" My mother crumpled. Sobs racked her body as the truth came pouring out in a pathetic, blubbering confession. She admitted everything, that Jessica had come up with the idea, that they had sold the ring, that they had used the money for their vacation. Jessica, for her part, just stood there, silent and stony, faced the picture of entitled defiance. She didn't even have the decency to look ashamed. It was then that I delivered the final blow. "I can't be in a family with thieves and liars," I said, my voice ringing with finality. I handed a stack of envelopes to David, who passed one to each of them. "This is my final word on the matter. It explains everything you've done and why you will never see or hear from me again." Inside each envelope was the letter I had written, detailing their betrayal in cold, hard detail. As they began to read, I turned and walked out of the room without a backward glance. I picked up the small bag I had packed, walked out the front door, and got into the pre-booked taxi that was waiting for me at the curb. My bus ticket was in my pocket. I wasn't just leaving the dinner, I was leaving them forever. The bus ride was a blur. I stared out the window at the passing city lights, the engines hum a soothing lullaby. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe again. The weight of their deception, a burden I hadn't even fully realized I was carrying, was gone. I spent the night in a quiet, anonymous hotel, sleeping more soundly than I had in a month. I wasn't running away from my life, I was running towards a new one free from the poison of their influence. David called me the next morning. He told me the aftermath had been exactly as we'd predicted. Aunt Carol had verbally dismantled my mother, her voice echoing through the house with words of shame and disappointment. She had called them ghouls preying on their own family. Jessica had tried to defend herself, but her excuses about deserving a break and me having insurance fell on deaf ears. They were ostracized, cast out from the family circle by the one person whose opinion they craved. They left my house that night in complete and utter disgrace. When I returned home 2 days later, the house felt lighter, cleaner. The guest room, where they had stayed and plotted, had been aired out. David and I sat down and talked for hours. Our marriage, which had been tested by this ordeal, felt stronger than ever. We were a team, united against the storm. He held my hand, and on my finger my grandmother's ring sparkled, a symbol not just of the past, but of our resilient future. We changed the locks on our doors. We blocked their numbers. We returned any mail they tried to send. We cut them out of our lives completely and surgically, just as the doctor had removed my appendix. The healing process was slow, but it was real. There were moments of sadness, ghosts of the family I thought I had, but they were fleeting. The peace that replaced them was profound and lasting. A few months later, my cousin Sarah told me that Jessica never went to Bali. The public shaming had been too much. She had to sell the tickets at a loss. She lost her job shortly after, as word of her character somehow made its way to her employer. My mother, I heard, had become a recluse, too ashamed to face her friends or the rest of the family. They had destroyed their own lives in their greed. I, on the other hand, was thriving. I poured myself back into my teaching, finding solace in the innocent honesty of my students. David and I started planning our own trip, a real vacation earned with honesty and hard work. The scar from my surgery faded, and so did the one on my heart. They had taken my ring, but in the end I had taken back my life, and that was a price they could never afford to pay.